There is a sound the Galactic Council Forum makes when a vote fails. A low resonant hum, 700 chambers vibrating in unison, each filled with species who have spent centuries learning how to disagree with each other politely. The hum means no. It means the machinery of galactic civilization has considered something and found it wanting. It is, in its own way, a kind of peace. The machinery holds. The machinery always holds. I have heard that sound 412 times in my career as a Secretariat observer. I know its weight. I know what comes after it, the slow shuffle of delegations, the quiet recalibration of positions, the patient, grinding continuation of everything. What I did not know, what none of us knew, what I suspect will end up in whatever passes for a history book after all of this, was what the forum sounds like when humans stand up and leave. Not vote no. Not abstain. Not file a formal protest or request an emergency session or do any of the 10,000 things a civilized species does when they are angry at a political body. Leave. All 41 of them. In silence. Without looking back. The hum didn't come. What came instead was something I don't have a word for in Vathri, and, I checked, I don't think any species in the forum has a word for it either, because nothing like this has ever happened before. It was the sound of 700 chambers suddenly, understanding, all at once, that they had miscalculated. That was 6 standard days ago. We have not slept much since. This is my record of what happened next. I'm submitting it not because anyone asked me to, and not because I think it will change anything. I've stopped believing in things I can change. I'm submitting it because someone should write down the moment the most powerful political body in the known galaxy panicked. And, because the humans aren't coming back. Let me tell you about the chair. Every delegation in the forum has a chair. Not a metaphorical chair, an actual physical seat in their assigned chamber, custom fabricated to match the biology of whoever is sitting in it. Some are pools. Some are pressure columns. Some are thermal platforms. The Drevathi don't sit so much as settle, and their chamber accommodation looks like a shallow lake of vibrating gel. Nobody asks questions. The forum accommodates. That is what the forum does. It is the one thing it has always been unambiguously good at. The human chair was unremarkable. Standard bipedal configuration. Firm back support. They'd requested the armrests be removed early on, which the accommodation staff found mildly confusing but complied with anyway. One of the humans, a woman named Delegate Senior Yael Okafor, had explained during the initial setup that humans didn't like feeling contained when they were frustrated, and that armrests, in her words, make it worse. The accommodations staff logged this without comment. We log everything without comment. That is also what we do. I know all of this because I was the senior observer assigned to the human delegation oversight file. A post I requested, incidentally. 3 years ago, when the humans first joined the forum, there were 37 competing applications for the oversight position. I reviewed every candidate personally and, then, submitted my own name instead, which is either a sign of supreme professional confidence or catastrophically poor judgment, and I have spent the last 3 years unable to determine which. My name is Secretariat Officer Vensol. Rank, 3rd Tier Observer, Forum Diplomatic Division. I have 6 sensory organs, 2 of which are currently malfunctioning from stress-related compression, and a deeply inconvenient habit of annotating my personal logs with marginalia that would end my career if anyone read them. Nobody reads them. They are the only place I am honest. Current margin note, we did this to ourselves. Elaborate. The vote that broke it was not, on its surface, a dramatic one. Authorization Resolution 7741C. Framework governing human territorial expansion into the unregistered rim sectors. That's what it was called. That is the kind of language the forum uses, careful, nested, architectural language that means things without saying them. Framework governing means restrictions on. Unregistered rim sectors means the space humans found on their own, outside anyone's existing claim, while everyone else was still arguing about committee appointments. The humans had been expanding into the rim for about 2 of their years. Quietly, officially, in the way they do most things, not sneaking, exactly, but not announcing themselves either. Setting up stations. Running resource surveys. Establishing what their documentation called provisional habitation infrastructure, which is an admirably bureaucratic way of saying we live here now. Nobody had objected at first. The rim sectors were unregistered for a reason: they were far, they were cold, the stellar density made navigation genuinely unpleasant, and 3 previous survey expeditions by established forum species had come back with essentially the same report: nothing here worth the transit cost. The humans had apparently read those reports and reached a different conclusion, which should have told us something. It told us nothing. I annotated this at the time: they went where we said was worthless. Note for later. I did not follow up on the note. 2 years of quiet rim expansion, and then, someone on the Vectory Economic Council ran the resource projections the humans had submitted, ran them properly, with current modeling, and the number that came back was large enough to require a secondary verification. The secondary verification came back larger. The tertiary, which they ran twice, came back larger still. The rim wasn't worthless. The rim was, depending on how you projected extraction timelines and current material pricing across the next 40 standard years, potentially the most resource-dense unregistered territory in the forum's history. And the humans had been living in it for 2 years. The vote came together in 11 days. 11 days is, by forum standards, approximately the speed of light. Normally a resolution of this scope takes 8 to 12 months of committee review, subcommittee consultation, drafted amendments to the amendments, and at least one emergency recess caused by a Drevathi elder going into their molting cycle at an inconvenient moment. 11 days meant people were scared. 11 days meant the usual process had been quietly set aside in favor of the thing the forum only does when it is acting out of something less dignified than policy. Panic, dressed up in parliamentary language. I filed 3 separate procedural objections on behalf of my division, not on behalf of the humans. I want to be clear about that. I am an observer and observers do not advocate, but procedural objections on the grounds that the timeline violated the forum's own charter provisions regarding territorial review. I have the documentation. I submitted it formally. It was received, logged, and then, apparently placed in whatever administrative folder the forum uses for things it intends to ignore. Current margin note: the folder is very full. Delegate Senior Okafor knew the vote was coming. Of course she knew, the humans always know, which is either an impressive intelligence operation or a sign that this body is substantially less secure than it believes itself to be, and I have learned to hold both possibilities simultaneously. She had spent the preceding 4 days in what I can only describe as a sustained and methodical offensive, meetings with 31 delegations, individually, in their preferred environments, at hours calibrated to each species' peak cognitive function. I know this because I track the human delegations calendar as part of my oversight function. She met with the Vectory at their dawn equivalent, because Vectory think most clearly in the first hours of their active cycle. She met with the Pelori Confederacy representatives at what they call the third resting, because Pelori are most emotionally receptive when slightly drowsy. She met with the Drevathi elder, the one who had, 18 months ago, referred to the human presence in the rim as an infestation of warm-blooded opportunists, and somehow came out of that meeting with what my notes describe as ambiguous but not hostile body language from the elder, which may constitute a diplomatic achievement of historic proportions. I don't know what she said to the Drevathi elder. I asked one of the junior staff who was outside the room. He said all he heard was low conversation and, at one point, what he thought was laughter. Drevathi elders do not laugh. They have a vocalization that serves a similar social function, but it is produced by their secondary respiratory system and sounds less like laughter and more like a building settling. The junior staff member is new and had not yet learned this distinction. I made a note to brief him later. Then, I crossed it out. There would be a later for that. The morning of the vote, I arrived early. I arrive early as a professional habit and also because the forum's primary cafeteria serves a Vectory-adjacent heated beverage that is technically not coffee. Coffee is a human substance and I have no human taste apparatus, but has approximately the same relationship to my neurochemistry that coffee apparently has to theirs. It does not improve cognition, it does not provide genuine alertness, it simply makes the absence of sleep feel slightly less like a personal failing. I drink 3 of them before major sessions. I have been drinking them for 11 years. They taste, to the best of my ability to describe it, like warm regret and mineral sediment. I was on my second cup when the human delegation arrived. 41 of them. This was already unusual. Most delegations send between 3 and 8 representatives to a floor vote, with the remainder accessible by calm if needed. The humans had sent everyone. All 41 credentialed members of their forum delegation, including 2 I had never seen on the floor before, a senior military attaché named Commandant Rail de Brescu, who was technically present in an advisory capacity and did not have a floor vote, and a woman I did not recognize whose credentials listed her as a cultural liaison, which is the forum's politely ambiguous title for someone whose actual function you are not supposed to ask about. They took their seats. Okafor was in the center of their block, back straight, armrests conspicuously absent. Debrescu sat to her left. The cultural liaison sat at the end of the row closest to the primary exit corridor, which I noted and did not know what to do with. I was on my third cup when the session was called to order. The vote itself took 22 minutes. The resolution passed 449 to 41. The 41 opposing votes were the human delegation, voting as a single block. Everyone else voted in favor. Some delegations who had privately expressed reservations to Okafor, I know this because she told me, during one of our routine oversight meetings, with an expression I had come to recognize as her version of professional neutrality, which looks the same as her version of profound disappointment, voted for the resolution anyway. The resolution, in practical terms, placed a development freeze on all human infrastructure in the rim sectors pending a 12-year review process, established a joint oversight committee composed entirely of non-human species, and required all existing human installations to be converted to shared-use facilities within 3 forum standard years. In less practical terms, it told them to stop what they were doing, give up what they had found, and wait 12 years while everyone else decided what to do about the fact that humans had been more competent than expected. The presiding chair announced the result. 449 to 41. Resolution carried. Okafor stood up. She didn't speak. Didn't gesture. She stood up from the seat with no armrests, and then she looked not at the chair, not at the chamber, but at Debrescu. Something passed between them that I could not read, and I am very good at reading cross-species communication. Not a signal I recognized. Not any of the 37 human non-verbal cues I had spent 3 years cataloging. Something older than signals. Debrescu stood. Behind him, the entire delegation stood. One by one, in the particular human way where no one needed to be told, where the decision seemed to travel through them without words, the way a change in pressure travels through water, all 41 of them were on their feet. And then, they left. Not quickly. Not dramatically. They walked out the primary exit corridor at a measured pace, in a loose formation that I recognized, belatedly, as a military egress pattern. The cultural liaison at the end of the row had positioned herself nearest the exit not out of preference but because she would be the last one through and the first to check that the corridor was clear. They had planned this. This was not a spontaneous walkout. They had planned to lose, and they had planned what to do after. I stood there holding my cup of warm regret and mineral sediment, and I watched the door close behind the last of them, and I thought, with a clarity that felt uncomfortably close to despair, we have made a mistake the size of something I do not have a word for yet. The forum sat in silence for, I checked my records later, 4 full minutes. 4 minutes of silence in a room containing 700 delegates representing 62 species who professionally disagree with each other for a living. Then, the chair cleared their secondary vocal apparatus and said, formally, the session is suspended pending procedural review. Which is parliamentary language for, what do we do now? Current margin note, we have no idea. Begin elaborating. The call started within the hour. Not to the human delegation, I checked, because I check everything, it is the only habit I have that is more compulsive than the bad coffee. No one from the senior forum administrative body contacted the human delegation in the first hour after the walkout. In the first hour, the calls were internal, the Vectory Council chair to the Pelori First Minister, the Pelori First Minister to the Drevathi Elder who may or may not have laughed with Okafor 4 days ago, the Drevathi Elder to the forum's Secretary General, the Secretary General to the forum's legal division, the legal division to, apparently, everyone, In a series of rapid-fire communications that my monitoring systems flagged as high priority and my personal annotation logged as they are trying to find a rule that says this isn't as bad as it looks. There is no such rule. I checked. The forum charter has no provision for what happens when a member species walks out of a floor vote and stops responding to communications. Because it has never happened. Because the implicit assumption, baked into every layer of forum governance, is that member species participate. They argue, they obstruct, they delay, they lobby, they bribe in the ways that aren't technically called bribing, they do every possible thing a political entity can do to influence outcomes, but they stay in the room. They remain part of the process. The room is the forum. The forum is the room. You don't leave. The humans left. And, now, this is the part that no one was saying out loud but that I could read in every communication I was monitoring, in the gap between what was being said and what was being meant. Now the forum had to decide what it was without them. I finished my third cup. It tasted, today, worse than usual. I opened a new annotation file. Titled it, Day 1. Started writing. The human delegation had taken quarters in the forum residential complex, neutral territory, owned by the Secretariat, 3 levels below the primary assembly chambers. I walked down there that evening, not because I was supposed to, but because my oversight function technically gave me access and I had not yet been told it didn't anymore. The corridor outside their residential section was quiet. Lights at standard dim. I stood at the far end and I could hear, very faintly, through the sound-dampened doors, voices. More than one. The particular frequency overlap that indicates multiple humans speaking simultaneously but not arguing, something else. Something that my acoustic sensors cataloged and my cultural files cross-referenced and came back with a result that I stared at for a long moment. They were laughing. Not all of them. 3 voices, maybe 4. But the pattern was unmistakable, low, irregular, genuine. The sound of people who had just done something they knew was irreversible and had decided, together, that this was fine. That this was, in fact, funny. I stood in that corridor for longer than I should have. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I just stood there listening to the sound of 41 political operatives behind closed doors in the aftermath of the largest diplomatic rupture in forum history, laughing at something I would never know the content of. Current margin note, I don't think they're afraid. I think that's the problem. By day 3, the forum had developed a rash. Not a literal rash, though the Drevith the Elder was in her 3rd week of a stress-adjacent molting cycle that her attendants kept describing as routine in tones that suggested the opposite of routine. The rash I mean is metaphorical, a proliferation of emergency committees, subcommittees, emergency subcommittee preparatory working groups, and at least one body that I could not find in any official registry and whose meeting notes were being circulated under the title Informal Consultation Process, which in forum language means we are doing something we don't want documented. I have documented it anyway. I document everything. This is, depending on who you ask, either my greatest professional asset or the specific personality trait most likely to get me quietly reassigned to a monitoring post on the outer administrative rim where I would spend the remainder of my career logging atmospheric readings and talking to no one. Margin note, at this point, I'm not sure that's a threat. The question everyone was asking, in the formal committees, in the informal ones, in the corridor conversations I was not supposed to overhear but my secondary sensory organs made impossible not to, was not, how do we fix this? The question was smaller and more frightened than that. The question was, are they coming back? Because here is what no one had fully modeled in the 11 days of frantic vote consolidation, what the forum actually ran on. Not votes. Not resolutions. Not the elaborate procedural machinery that had been built over 3 centuries to manage disagreement between species who found each other alternately baffling and intolerable. What the forum ran on was presence. Everyone had to be there. Everyone had to care enough to show up and fight and obstruct and delay and, occasionally, in the Drevith the Elder's case, make a sound like a building settling when something particularly offensive was proposed. The fighting was not incidental to the forum's function, it was the function. the negotiation, the compromise, the slow grinding of incompatible interests against each other until something workable emerged, that required bodies in chairs and voices in chambers and the shared, implicit commitment to remain in the room. The humans had been in the forum for 3 years. In those 3 years, they had submitted 847 resolutions, 412 of which passed, blocked or amended 203 resolutions from other delegations, formed 11 bilateral agreements with species they had no prior diplomatic contact with, and, somehow, I still have not fully reconstructed how gotten the Vectory and the Pelori to jointly fund a navigation infrastructure project that those two species had been refusing to collaborate on for 60 years. They had not done this by being louder than everyone else. They had not done it by being smarter, or more aggressive, or more strategically sophisticated in any way I could isolate and point to. They had done it by being relentlessly, exhaustingly, almost aggressively present. In every committee. In every working group. In every informal consultation process. They had attended things that no one expected them to attend, asked questions no one expected them to ask, and then followed up, individually, with each participant afterward. I had once, during a routine observation session, watched Delegate Senior Okafor attend a 2-hour working group on Drevathy aquatic preservation law, a topic with no conceivable relevance to human interests, take careful notes throughout, and then spend 40 minutes afterward in quiet conversation with a junior Drevathy staffer who clearly had not expected anyone to be interested in what they were working on. I had filed this observation under anomalous behavior and never found a better category for it. I understood now. 3 years of careful, attentive, irrelevant presence. 3 years of showing up to things and paying attention and asking the junior staffers about their work. And now the chairs were empty. The forum didn't know what to do with empty chairs. The forum had never needed to know. Commandant Debrescu was the first human I spoke to after the walkout. Not by my choice, or rather, it was my choice in the way that most of my choices about the human delegation were my choices. I made them and then spent time afterward being unable to explain my reasoning to anyone, including myself. My oversight function technically required me to maintain contact with the delegation. The delegation had not formally withdrawn from the forum. They had simply stopped attending. There was, my legal division colleagues confirmed when I asked, no precedent and, therefore, no clear protocol. I went to the residential corridor. This time I knocked. Debrescu answered. Not Okafor, not the cultural liaison to Debrescu, in what I had learned were civilian clothes, which on him looked like a personal system of organization that had given up on aesthetics entirely. He was holding a cup of something hot. Humans drink many hot beverages. I have catalogued this. I understand the social function, but I find the frequency surprising. He looked at me for a moment. The human face is, I want to note for the record, one of the most expressive biological surfaces I have encountered in my career, and I have observed 62 species. Most species keep their emotional signaling in their secondary apparatuses: posture, chemical secretion, chromatic shift. Humans put everything on one small patch of tissue and, then, bafflingly, act surprised when other people can read them. Debrescu's face said, I knew someone would come. I didn't expect it to be you. Vensol, he said. Not Officer Vensol. Not Secretariat Observer. Just my name, the way humans use names when they are not performing rank at you. Commandant, I said. I'm not here officially. I know, he said. You would have announced it if you were. He stepped aside. Come in. The residential section was functional. The forum's accommodations for human delegates had been designed by committee, which meant it was technically correct and emotionally inert. Standard lighting. Neutral temperature. Furniture that fit human proportions without fitting anything else about them. Someone had propped the corridor window open to the forum's interior atrium, which let in the low ambient sound of the building's ventilation system and, also, faintly, the sound of other delegations moving between sections. 3 other humans were in the common area. I recognized 2 of them, a junior attaché named Privek whose pronunciation I had never fully mastered, and one of the environmental specialists whose name I had in my files but who I had never spoken to directly. The third was someone new to me, young, by human standards, with the particular quality of stillness that I had come to associate with humans who were managing something internally and not yet ready to let it out. They looked at me. Nobody left the room. This was, I realized, intentional. In human social practice, when a private conversation is desired, the others absent themselves. No one absented themselves. Whatever I said to Debrescu, they were all going to hear it. Margin note, accountability structure. They witness each other. I sat. Debrescu sat across from me. He didn't offer me a beverage, which I noted in our previous interactions over 3 years, he had offered. Not offering meant something. I logged it and moved on. The working group on Resolution 7741C convenes tomorrow, I said. I've been asked to inform member delegations. We're aware, Debrescu said. Your participation we're aware of that too. A pause. The ventilation hummed. Will you? I asked. The human face does something when a decision has already been made and the person is deciding whether to explain it to you. A particular settling, like a conclusion finding its final position. Debrescu's face did that. That depends, he said, on whether the forum is going to explain what it thought was going to happen. I had prepared for several versions of this conversation. I had not prepared for that specific sentence. I don't follow. 700 delegates, Debrescu said. 3 years of us being in every room, on every committee, in every conversation. You had 3 years to read us. He was not angry. He was something quieter than angry, which was harder to navigate. What did you think we were going to do when you took the rim? The room was very still. I don't make policy, I said. Which was true and, also, in this moment, deeply beside the point, and we both knew it. No, he said. But, you observe. That's the job, right? You watch us and, you understand us and, you tell the forum what you understand. He looked at me steadily. So tell me what you told them. This is the part of my log where I should note that I have reviewed my formal assessments and briefings to the forum administrative body over the course of my 3 years observing the human delegation. I have produced, in that time, 47 substantial analytical reports, 11 urgent advisory notices, and 1 comprehensive psychological cultural profile of Delegate Senior Okafor that I spent 4 months on and submitted to the Senior Assessment Office, where it was received, acknowledged, and I subsequently confirmed, never distributed to the delegations whose voting behavior it was designed to inform. I told them, I said, that humans have a concept they call sunken cost which is actually more complex than it sounds. That's not what I'm asking. And that you form attachments to outcomes that scale with investment, meaning the more you put into something the less able you are to advance. I stopped. Did you tell them, Debrescu said, that we would leave? The ventilation hummed. The junior attaché whose name I couldn't pronounce set down his cup very carefully. No, I said. I didn't. Why not? And here is what I said, which I am including in this log because it is the first moment in this entire account where I have been fully honest, because I didn't think you would. I knew you were angry. I knew the resolution was going to pass and I knew what it meant and I filed my procedural objections. I have documentation, but I didn't believe you would actually leave, because I stopped again. Because? Debrescu said. Because no one leaves, I said. It isn't done. The forum is the process and the process is the forum and you participate in the process. That's what membership is. I knew you were capable of it tactically, the words were coming out wrong. They were true but, they were coming out in the wrong shape. I thought you cared about the forum more than you cared about the outcome. The room was very still again. Debrescu looked at me for a long moment. Then, he said, quietly, we care about outcomes. I know that now. You should have known it before. Yes, I said. I should have. He didn't tell me whether they would come back. He walked me to the door, and, at the door he paused, and, he said, you filed 3 procedural objections. Not a question. I have the documentation. I know you do. Okafor showed me. A beat. You should know she made a note of it. I did not know how to respond to that. I nodded, which is a human gesture that I have adopted from proximity. It's not a V3 expression, but it has the right emotional weight, a kind of small acknowledgement that doesn't commit to anything. The working group convenes at the second hour, I said. We know, he said. And closed the door. I attended the working group. 41 empty chairs. The group convened anyway, which is the forum's way of insisting that the machinery still works. The Vectory representative presented preliminary draft language for a revised implementation framework. The Pelori representative asked 3 questions, each one slightly sharper than the last. The Drevathi Elder's proxy, she had sent a proxy, which was itself unusual, sat at the table and made no sound at all. I sat in my observer's position and I watched 41 empty chairs and I thought about what Debrescu had said. We care about outcomes. 3 years. 847 resolutions. 11 bilateral agreements. A Vectory Pelori navigation project. A junior Drevathi staffer who had expected no one to care about aquatic preservation law and found, inexplicably, that someone did. The forum had looked at 41 empty chairs and seen absence. I was starting to wonder if we were supposed to see something else. Margin note, what are they doing right now? What they were doing, I found out later, not from official sources, because official sources had stopped receiving human communications, but from my own monitoring systems, which continued to function, was working. Not forum work. Not committee work. Not the elaborate procedural labor of legislative bodies. They were calling people. Individual calls. Not to delegations, to people. Junior staffers, mostly. Some technical specialists. A few of the secondary cultural liaisons from mid-sized member species who handled the parts of forum business that nobody filmed or quoted from. The people who knew where things actually were, how systems actually functioned, which processes were genuinely broken and which were merely performing brokenness for political reasons. The calls were not about the rim. I have transcripts of several of them. My monitoring function is comprehensive and I have made my peace with that, and the rim came up obliquely, occasionally, as a reference point, but it was not the subject. The subject, as best I could reconstruct it, was, what do you need? Not the forum. Not the delegations. The individual people on the other end of these calls, who spent their careers servicing a political process and were very rarely asked whether the process was servicing them. I watched this happen for 2 days before I understood what it was. Margin note, they're building something. Not in the rim. The empty chairs were not emptiness. The empty chairs were the visible part. The part one could monitor, the part the forum could point at and worry about in its committees and subcommittees and informal consultation processes. The humans weren't in the chairs. They were everywhere else. And no one, not the Vectory Council, not the Pelori First Minister, not the Drevathi Elder via her proxy, had thought to look. On day 5, Okafor requested a meeting with me. Not with the forum. Not with the Secretary General or the administrative body or any official capacity. With me, specifically, as named in the request, Secretariat Officer Vensol, 3rd Tier Observer. The meeting was set for early morning, forum time. The cafeteria, before the main session hours, when it was mostly empty except for the staff who kept the heating elements running and the other observers and junior staffers who, like me, arrived early and sat with our bad beverages and tried to assemble what we understood about the day before the day began. She was already there when I arrived. She had coffee. Real coffee. The humans had long since arranged to have it available in the cafeteria, which had required 3 months of nutritional compatibility reviews and a frankly tedious amount of procurement negotiation, all of which had been handled with characteristic human patience and follow-through by one of the junior delegation members. The coffee sat in a cup that was, I noticed, not the forum's standard issue. Her own. She'd brought it from their residential section. The small things. The constant, specific, slightly irrational small things. Vensol, she said. Sit down. I sat. I had not gotten my beverage yet. This was the first time in 3 years that I had sat across from Okafor without my bad coffee in hand, and I found, irrationally, that I missed it. "You want to know if we're coming back," she said. "Everyone wants to know that." "I know." She wrapped both hands around her cup, a human gesture I had catalogued as comfort-seeking, the warmth being the point, and looked at me with the expression I had come to call her version of professional neutrality, which was identical to her version of profound disappointment, which was itself identical to her version of being about to say something true. "I'm going to ask you something and I want an honest answer." "I'll try." "Not try. Answer honestly or don't answer at all." "Not harsh." Just the shape of someone who had spent 3 years in a room full of people performing things they didn't mean and had run out of patience for it. "Yes," I said. "The procedural objections you filed," she said. "Did you think they would work?" I considered lying. Not maliciously, I considered it the way you consider any option when the honest answer is uncomfortable. Then, I thought of Debrescu's door closing. "No," I said. "I filed them because the process requires it and because someone should have it on record that the process was violated. I didn't file them because I thought they would be heard." Okafor nodded. Her coffee steamed. "That's the forum in one sentence," she said. "Filing things because someone should have it on record." We sat with that for a moment. "Are you coming back?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. The cafeteria hummed around us, the forum waking up in its slow institutional way, the early morning sounds of a building that had been designed for civilization and was now trying to figure out what civilization looked like without one of its members in it. "That," Okafor said, "is a question about what the forum is willing to do." "And if the forum does it?" She picked up her cup. Stood. Looked at me with the expression that was simultaneously professional neutrality and profound disappointment and something about to be true. "We'll have an answer to the other question," she said. And left. I sat there in the empty cafeteria with no bad coffee and tried to reconstruct, from everything I had observed in 3 years and 5 days, what the other question was. Margin note: the other question is, what is this place for? They've known that for 3 years. They want to know if we know it. UAL documents. Here's a quick orientation. Hook opens with the sound the forum makes when a vote fails, pivots hard to the sound it makes when humans simply leave. Builds dread before the story starts. Part 1 in the chair that stayed empty, for 500 words, establishes Vensol as narrator, the bad coffee habit, the marginalia obsession, reconstructs the vote and the walkout in detail, ends with Vensol standing outside the human corridor at night, hearing them laugh. Part 2 the shape of the silence, for 500 words, Vensol's conversations with Debrescu and, then, Okafor. The forum's immune system failing to find a rule that covers this. The humans making calls, not to delegations, to people. Okafor's line, the other question is, what is this place for? Part 3, the thing the forum didn't know it had, for 500 words, the Drevath the Elder breaks from pattern. The informal consultation process. The Secretary General's meeting with the humans, the document case that never gets opened. The humans return. The session ends unresolved, deliberately. Craft notes on what's running under the surface. Vensol's marginalia function as the emotional rupture layer. They say what the professional text can't. The armrests are a two-level metaphor, literally comfort, thematically, don't contain us, human traits shown entirely through behavior, pack loyalty in the walkout formation, strategy in the junior staff calls, stubbornness in the closed document case. Ending lands on Vensol choosing to stay at their desk, ambiguous, and earn Claude is AI. And can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.